How you doing, Martin?
I'm all right. Yes. Yeah.
So what we've got this week is we've got Dives and Lazarus, Luke 16, 19 to 31. We continue with Luke. So thoughts about this teaching of Jesus, this parable that he tells?
Yeah, so I mean, it's interesting. First of all, we've only got this in Luke. Secondly, it's the only parable where one of the actors is named. I think I'm right, and it's also, I think, the only parable where a patriarch features as a participant, as in Abraham. So some interesting kind of reflections there, and of course, fairly early on, people tried to insist on there being a name for the rich man, and so we've got Dives, which is basically from the Latin, which means rich.
Yeah.
But it was almost like we couldn't cope with the fact that the beggar was favoured by a name, and the name, of course, I think means something like God helps him.
God will help. Yeah.
So the parable is set up, and I think there are some dangers in it, because you can slip into an interpretation that says, it'll all be all right in the end, the poor will get their reward in heaven. There is that danger, but I don't think that's what the point is about. And the interesting thing is to see that it's placed right after the parable of the unjust steward. And in the parable of the unjust steward, as complicated and as strange as it is, the point there is that the unjust steward does something about what he sees his fate is going to be. He acts in order to prevent something happening to him. And what you've got in the rich man and Lazarus is the rich man being completely oblivious of the situation he's in and what the corruption it's doing to his soul, and completely blind to the plight of the man who's at his gate, and does nothing about it. And therefore, in the sequence of the story, the way the story is told, interestingly, when he is crying out after he's died, crying out to Lazarus and to Abraham, he's not crying out to say, get me out of here. He's crying out to say, give me some water so I can survive where I am. It's almost like he's fixed, the state he's in is fixed in the same way that he behaved as if the state he was in life was fixed. And then, of course, you get the next step about appealing to Abraham to send somebody to warn his family, and the response, well, you've had plenty of evidence that would encourage you for a conversion of heart, which is really what the story is about, and to recognize that if you are rich, you have a responsibility not to be attached to that wealth in such a way that it corrupts your soul, and to ensure that those who are poor around you, and presumably further afield, receive benefit from your wealth.
Yeah.
And it's that quality of detachment. It's the same when Jesus says to the rich man, the young rich ruler, says, go and sell everything you have. It's that same quality of detachment that he's seeking in that. Interestingly, just to kind of finish up, John Chrysostom preached 6 sermons on this parable in the space of a couple of weeks.
Right.
To his congregation. He began, this was in late 4th century. He began on January the 2nd, and started by kind of lambasting the excessive celebrations of Saturnalia, and then goes through the parable in the course of these 6 sermons, taking a phrase or a section. So he starts by reflecting on the condition of, in this life, of Lazarus and of the rich man. But what's interesting about it is, first of all, as we see with Augustine in his sermons, there's no fear about challenging the rich in the way that we kind of get mealy-mouthed about challenging the rich. No fear about saying, actually, money is something you've got to handle really well, because it is spiritually dangerous. But he's also digging all the time in each of those sermons, digging into what is the spiritual dimension of this, not as in alternative to material, but how do we understand our material existence through the lens of that spiritual reality, and that spiritual condition. They're interesting, worth reading. They're not quite slim collection, but it's worth seeing how he engages with that. And you think, the congregation listened to 6 sermons in the course of 2 weeks on that same parable. Your thoughts?
Well, I feel a bit like Lazarus left to pick up the crumbs from
all right.
So, well, a couple of things, a couple of details that are interesting. So, just before the parable starts, and between the unjust steward and this parable, Jesus says, or rather Luke says, he now speaks to the Pharisees, who were lovers of money. So, going back to your point, so he's sniffed out there is an unhealthy attachment here. So this is what he's going to have a go at, and so he does. He starts by describing the rich man, as dressed in purple, very expensive, ostentatious, showing off his wealth and feasting every day. Again, ostentatious. This man's a show-off, and clearly his identity is caught up with this sense of being rich. Lazarus is bang in trouble. He's clearly ill. He's clearly having to be carried to the place where he can beg at the gates by others, because his legs are so bad, and the dogs come and lick his sores. Now, dogs have a generally bad press in the Old and New Testaments, and the fact that they have some antiseptic apparently in their saliva that enables them to. This is a positive and healing thing, but it's ironic because the dogs are probably the ones who are getting the crusts that the feasters throw away, and they've eaten them. That's what Lazarus is after, and they end up being the only ones who take care of Lazarus. One of the interesting things about it is how this passage has been used to understand what happens to us when we die. And just picking up one of the things that you said, the fact that the rich man doesn't ask to be translated to where Lazarus is, and he hasn't changed in any respect through this sobering, you would have thought, experience of being put in this miserable state. In fact, his first words upon seeing Lazarus are he barks that he wants him to come and do something for him. Whereas he had ignored his agony all his life at his gate. The first thing that the rich man wants is for him to come and serve him where he is and make sure that he soothes him. So, there's a great chasm set between them. And one of the ways of understanding Abraham saying this great chasm is the great chasm is the way in which you have developed a way of being and an orientation which has been so concretized, so built into your identity, that this is what you are now. And even then, he then barks another order for what Lazarus to do. Make him go and tell my brothers, about this, so that they can at least be changed. Again, he doesn't see Lazarus. What he sees is a servant and somebody at his beck and call. He is absolutely fixed. And it's not for nothing, perhaps, that immediately after this parable, therefore, there's a parable about repentance and forgiveness. Not a parable, but a saying of Jesus immediately about repentance and forgiveness. I guess the other thing maybe to mention is some people perhaps unwisely have used this as a kind of Jesus' indication of what might happen to us when we die, in the sense that there is an immediacy of being at, and a conscious immediacy of going to the bosom of Abraham, or to be with God, or its opposite. And there's been arguments about, well, but what about the corporate resurrection at the end of time and the final judgment and all of that? And some people have said, well, you know, you've got to remember the experience of some people that as they're dying, they see their loved ones coming towards them. And, you know, there is an immediacy. And, well, Paul says we fall asleep. Maybe that's a sleep that has some sense of consciousness. And then the people argue back. But then are you saying there's a judgment before there's a judgment because of that sense and all of that? I mean, for my money,
it's very complicated.
Well, yeah. But I don't think you can read too much into it. It is, after all, a parable.
It's a parable.
And the point is that, you know, when you put it in the context of the lovers of money, in terms of becoming so fixated that our kingdom becomes so much to do with ourselves and our wealth that we can't possibly want to be in God's kingdom. That this is an important warning of Jesus about the freedom we have to shape ourselves in such ways that we can close ourselves to grace if we're not careful.
And I think there are very immediate reflections that we can make in relation to the current cost of living crisis and the relationship between those who have and those who are having less and less. And we might also want to say to those bankers who mysteriously are being given uncapped bonuses now, and you just think, what on earth is driving that? And you know, you pray that they may have their hearts turned and they give it all away. We are in an age, and particularly in a very present moment, where we have rather more dives than we do attention to Lazarus.
And pray that they and we may not be imprisoned in the way that Rockefeller indicated he might have been when, amidst his millions, asked, how much do you need? He said, just a bit more than I've got.
Thank you.